morning, let's talk about HB 1071 and its Senate companion, SB 1090. This is a large education bill, so instead of covering everything, I'm going to focus on the parts that most directly affect students, parents, and school districts. Specifically, health education, parental consent, how districts can spend money, who controls curriculum, and how low-performing schools are identified and required to respond. HB 1071 adds new state requirements for health education in Florida public schools. Under this bill, students in grades 6 through 12 must receive instruction on human embryologic and fetal development. The bill says this instruction must be medically accurate and may include multimedia materials such as high-definition ultrasound video. That's important because the bill does not spell out which materials are acceptable or which are excluded. Because of that, this language could open the door to videos like Baby Olivia or Baby Oliver. These are animated videos about fetal development that are produced by advocacy organizations. They've been criticized by medical and education experts for mixing ideology with instruction using emotional framing instead of neutral clinical biology. The concern here is not teaching biology. The concern is that the law sets a required topic without clear guardrails on how that topic is taught or who decides which materials meet the standard. HB 1071 also expands parental consent requirements in Florida public schools. Under this bill, districts must obtain affirmative parental consent before a student can receive certain instruction or participate in specific school activities. This is an opt-in model. Under an opt-out model, students participate unless a parent says no. Under an opt-in model, students do not participate unless a parent explicitly says yes. If a parent does not respond, the student is excluded. This matters because it shifts the responsibility onto families to actively respond to school communications. For districts, this increases administrative workload. For families with language barriers, limited internet access, or less flexibility, students may miss instructions by default, not because a parent objected, but because a form was never returned. HB 1071 also affects how school districts can spend education funds. Under this bill, districts are given new directives about how certain funds must be used to address identified priorities. In particular, the bill narrows local discretion by tying spending decisions more closely to state-defined goals. On paper, this is framed as accountability. In practice, it means districts have less flexibility to respond to local needs. District leaders may be required to spend money in specific ways, even if those choices don't align with what a school or community has identified as its most urgent needs. This shifts decision-making away from local school boards and toward state-level priorities. The question isn't whether oversight matters. The question is, who decides what solutions look like, local communities or the state? That's the change districts would need to navigate under HB 1071. On top of changes for finances, there's also changes over curriculum decisions in Florida public schools. Under this bill, the state increases its role in setting expectations for what districts must teach and how that instruction is structured. This limits the discretion of local school boards and educators to make curriculum decisions based on local needs. Curriculum decisions are not just academic. They shape what students learn, how topics are framed, and whose judgment matters. When control shifts upward, districts have less ability to adapt instruction to their communities. The issue here isn't whether standards exist. The issue is who gets the final say. The local school boards that are accountable to their communities, or the state, applying a one-size-fits-all approach. That's the shift HB 1071 continues. HB 1071 also changes how low-performing schools are identified and what districts are required to do in response. Under this bill, schools that meet state-defined criteria must implement specific interventions outlined in law. These responses are more prescriptive and leave districts with fewer options to design solutions based on local context. Low-performing schools often serve students with the greatest needs. When interventions are narrowly defined at the state level, districts lose flexibility to respond to staffing realities, student populations, and community conditions. Accountability remains, but discretion is reduced. That changes how improvement efforts play out on the ground. Taken together, HB 1071 and SB 1090 do not just change one thing. They affect what is taught, how consent works, how money is spent, who controls curriculum, and how schools are required to respond when they struggle. That is not a narrow bill. It is a structural bill that reshapes decision-making across the system. The next key thing to watch is whether HB 1070 is placed on the Education and Employment Committee agenda. That is the point when public input and attention matters the most. On the Senate side, it's whether SB 1090 receives its first committee hearing. I'll keep tracking both bills as they move or don't move through the process. If you want updates or action alerts when the bill is scheduled, check the links below. And if this kind of clear, plain language breakdown is helpful, subscribe for weekly updates during legislative session.